Welcome, everybody, to today's Mentorship Mike speaker series. And to introduce today's guest, we have a short video. And then following the video, we have a short biography that our student host, Khaleesi Loveridge, will give to us. Let's go ahead and watch that video now.
I'm going to show you the size of these little people by having them sit down, one in each one of my hands.
Little people are kind of like the last acceptable blackface.
We bleed the same, our heart's the same. We just little, we just short stature.
You can't erase the fact that our people were bought and sold across circuses as actual literal property.
We need to be allowed to tell others what it means to be a little person. So that's what we're fighting for.
Cara Reedy is the founder and executive director of Disabled Journalists Association, a community that provides support, training, mentorship, and fellowship to disabled journalists. She started her career at CNN 20 years ago as an anchor assistant on The Morning Show. During her time at CNN, she produced documentaries and wrote for several verticals, including CNN Money, Entertainment, and Eatocracy. After her time at CNN, Cara freelanced on NPR's All Things Considered, where she focused on Olympic coverage. She has made 2 short documentaries, one with The Guardian entitled Dwarfism and Me, and the other for PBS American Masters Brad Lomax, Creating Communities of Care. After 20-plus years in New York City, she has moved back to St. Louis and is happy to be able to source toasted ravioli at will. Cara, welcome to Mentorship Mike.
Thank you.
We are so happy to have you with us this morning. Now, to start us off, I'd love to talk more about that documentary, which we saw a short video for at the beginning of today's session. Your documentary, Dwarfism and Me, centers your own experience. What made that kind of first-person, disability-led storytelling feel necessary at that moment?
So actually, I didn't want to do first person. That was the director's choice. We actually argued about it because I feel like so much of like media around disability is focused on like the personal. And so then we don't get to talk about systemic. And so we argued about it and then came to sort of some kind of like medium space where like I was used as the like my experience was used as the vehicle to explore larger issues around systemic discrimination around people with dwarfism.
Interesting. Well, hey, I want to hear a little bit more about toasted ravioli. Take us there a little bit. It sounds like you've got a good palate, so tell us more.
It's my favorite thing. When I first moved back, I OD'd on it. It's ravioli, fresh ravioli. It's not frozen from your freezer. Somebody's grandma makes it and they make it fresh and then they bread it and then they deep fry it. And then they give you a pot of like marinara sauce and you dip it and
You
it's
dip
finger
it.
food. It's so good. I can't.
Incredible. Well, that's good. Hey, Cara, tell us a little bit about what drew you to journalism initially. You've been with some major, CNN and some other major outlets. Tell us what drew you in originally, and just kind of how your efforts there got started.
It was actually an accident. I had no interest in it. Like it wasn't something I had thought about as a career. I was a theater kid. Went to theater school. I also have a degree in political science. For safety, for some reason, I thought I needed a double major. And then I kind of struggled after college trying to figure out like what to do because theater is not was I think theater is more welcoming now, but back then wasn't the most welcoming for people with disabilities. And so I struggled. I went back to art school. Again, I'm not sure what money making things I thought I was doing in my 20s. I got a degree in photography, which ultimately all of these things have kind of come together and made a better source of information for me for journalism that who knew back then. My parents kind of looking at me like, what is happening to you? But I moved to New York right after 9/11 and tried to get assistant work as a photographer's assistant, and there was nothing. Nobody was working. And there was no money, and everyone was out of work. And I ended up temping at Time Warner, which doesn't exist as a company anymore. It's now Warner Media, I think. I don't know what name they're going under by
Changes
now.
quite a bit, doesn't it?
It just keeps changing. So I was temping, but I was temping in like some corporate place where I was doing numbers and working on spreadsheets, but we all had a communal cafeteria. So CNN was in the building, and I met this woman, and we used to go around the cafeteria together, and I never knew where she worked because she didn't work with me. And then one day on a regular New York City bus, she was on it, and I'd never seen her. I was going home, and she walked up and said, "Hey, we don't even know each other's names, but we've been hanging out in the cafeteria for the last year." So we told each other, and then she said, "Where do you work?" And I told her, and I said, "Where do you work?" And she said, "CNN." And I said, "Oh, weirdly, I just applied for a job at CNN." Because I had seen all the CNN people in the cafeteria, and they were dressed casually and looked like they were having a good time. And that looked like somewhere I wanted to hang out. And she said, "Oh, what job? What?" When I told her I applied, and and she said, "Oh, that's gone. That job's filled." She said, "But next time you find a job that's open, just call me and I'll get your resume to the right person." And literally a week later, the anchor assistant job for the morning show came up, and I called. Arlene is her name. I called Arlene and said, "Look, this job's open." She said, "Got it. Send me their resume." And within hours, I honestly, Joanne called me. Within hours, that's how
Wow.
I got the job. And I interviewed and then started there. And then once I got on the show, I was like, "Oh, this is so exciting." Like everything was moving very fast and information was being researched, and it felt like home. Like it just felt very comfortable. And so that's kind of how I started. It was just an accident on a bus.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
That is so cool. Miss Kara, how would you say your background in photography and theater, as well as your political science degree, how did that help you feel at home when you started in that position? How did that lend strengths to the storytelling in journalism at CNN?
So theater, I think, is going to be a weird connection, but like when you're working on a play or on a production, you become very tight with the people that you're working on that production with. Well, TV shows are the same way. Like it's very high stakes, it's very fast. You're constantly picking up things that other people can't do, and you're moving quickly. And that to me felt very familiar. Um, Political science, that's sort of an easy connection. Like I studied government and how policy works, and journalism is reporting on that. It's taking what policy does to people and showing the effects, good or bad, in storytelling. Photography, because I worked on documentaries, it's being able to see what a frame looks like, how to tell a story visually. So I came to these three things accidentally, but they all kind of merged and helped me feel comfortable in journalism spaces.
Interesting. Interesting. So tell us, Cara, disability really is where you focus now. Talk a little bit about that transition, or I guess evolution may be a better word, from journalism, really focusing on journalism, CNN, et cetera, to DJA, the Disability, uh, Disabled Journalists Association. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, to be frank, it wasn't rosy at these major news organizations. It was very difficult. They weren't really accustomed to having someone who was visually disabled, like you can see their disability. There's a lot of disabled people who work in the news industry, but the fact that like I am visibly disabled was something that was kind of new to a lot of people there. And as a result, people bring their ableism with them inside wherever they go. People think that like newsrooms are these very enlightened spaces where everybody understands everything, everybody understands everyone. No, you come in, however you act outside is what you come in with. Like you don't all of a sudden become enlightened because you've walked through the doors of a news organization. So I had a very difficult time there. I was discriminated against a lot. Um, I spent a lot of time fighting um, about why I should be allowed to do certain things, cover certain things. And then I saw like a hole in coverage around disability. And so then I started advocating to cover disability stories, which then brought an entire new layer of discrimination because they were like, no one wants, I would hear stuff from people where like this story would be like a major story where a bunch of people were going to be cut from benefits or a rule somebody was being who someone was advocating for was going to imprison people or something. And I would pitch these stories, and they would a lot of times just say to me, I don't think anyone cares. So I don't think we should tell this story because nobody cares about that. And some of these are like direct quotes, like it's not me editorializing. They literally said nobody cares, so we don't need to cover it. And so I left CNN. I left. I chose to leave because I was uncomfortable, and um, and it really left me kind of rudderless. But I started freelancing. I freelanced at NPR, and I started feeling the same way there too. That like I was pitching stories, and they were like, "I don't know. I don't think that's a thing we need to cover." Um, They said it nicer at at NPR than they did at CNN, but it was still no. Um, and once I left NPR, I did the Guardian documentary, and then about 2020, Judy Human, who some people may know as the godmother of disability civil rights, she had just written a white paper for Ford Foundation around disabilities coverage in the media, but she was covering film and TV, journalism, and advertising. And she became aware of me through a man named Lawrence Carter Long and actually asked to meet with me, and which was shocking to me because I how did she even find out who I was? But
Mm.
and a movie had just come out, the Crip Camp, which is on Netflix, had just come out about her. So I knew her from that, but um and was in awe of like the things she had done. So we met, and she wanted to work together on fixing the systems. And the first day she hired me, and the first day I walked into the Zoom room because it was during COVID lockdown, she said, "Okay, great, you're hired. Now, what's your solution?" And I was like, give me a couple weeks to come up with some stuff." And I came up with 10 things. One of them was Disabled Journalists Association because it was something that I didn't have while I was there. I had no outlet to discuss with, people who were experiencing the same things. Um, I had nowhere to get training. Like these affinity groups, National Association of Black Journalists, National Association of Hispanic Journalists, they offer training. And I joined NABJ, but there was sort of like this disconnect where they understood Black discrimination, but they didn't understand disability discrimination. So it never really connected. So that's kind of where I came up with the idea for it. I was like, I needed this all along, so somebody else must need this too. And it turns out they did. So that's kind of where it came from.
That's a great story. Felicia, do you have another question?
I do. I must admit, I was kind of astounded when I heard you say people gave you that feedback, that people don't want to hear these stories. So I'm like trying to wrap my brain around that's insane, because while I think there absolutely are people who do want to hear it, besides want, I think society, we need to hear these stories and need to hear these voices. And I would love to ask, from your personal experience and then also what you've covered and observed as a journalist, have challenges been more systemic, how like the structure of things, the way things are done, or more cultural and societal, how things are seen and perceived, where it feels like culture's against you? Is there really a difference at all between the two? What has that
I
been
think
like?
they feed each other, right?
Mhm.
So culturally, if you've set up a culture of not caring about a group of people, then they haven't built the systems to include the people, right? So if you've never thought about disabled people, if you've never thought about having them in your newsroom, also means that you've never really thought about covering them, because how do you how do you have a discriminatory workplace and then are like, oh, I'm also going to go cover disabled people? Well, like, should you be covering them because your house isn't clean? Like, clean your own house first, and then maybe you can go cover them. Obviously, journalists, I love my journalist brethren and sisters and stuff, but egos are huge. And so there's this idea that they can cover anything, and then it's no, that they don't really need to like investigate their ableism, have any understanding of like, oh, maybe I've been raised in a culture that doesn't really understand accommodations, doesn't understand, you know, people are like, I get accommodations, but they don't really. Like, accommodations for someone who's disabled can look very differently to people, and it can feel, sometimes when I'm training, I'll say, sometimes people just need more time on stuff. Like, it's going to take them longer. And they're like, well, we don't have the time to do that. And I'm like, well, you do if you schedule it, but you have to reorganize how you function as a newsroom in order to do that. And so then there becomes this like culturally, well, we're breaking news. We do this, we do that. So they feel like they don't have to do accommodations because it's not possible in the framework that they've built over how many years, which is just not true. That is not sort of, that is why we have decided to do our own newsroom, sort of as a laboratory. And, all of the ideas where people told us, oh, that's not possible for you to put news out with all of these accommodations. I'm like, maybe it is. And so we spend a lot of time at DJ trying to figure out how we move around people's accommodations. Like, how do we, okay, this person needs more time. So what do we assign them so that they can have more time? But then this
Mm,
person can do stuff a little bit faster. And it doesn't mean that one person is better than the other. Or one story is better than the other. It means that we figure out how to work as a community so that we can achieve all of these goals and still take care of people, which is sort of foreign sometimes to newsroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to sneak in two questions before Khaleesi gets another chance, but I'm going to ask them both now. And then, Kara, I'd love to hear your answer. You talked about accommodations. What are, in your mind, the top three things that newsrooms in general could do to accommodate disabled journalists? So that's question number one. Secondly, since we're talking about marginalization or things that are kind of sometimes seen on the fringe, right? Abilities and ableism is one. Um, we're here talking about faith in media, and I know you're a person of belief. I'm just interested in delving a little bit deeper into that, what you've seen, from your experience at CNN and elsewhere, maybe PBS and some other places, how that is seen very similar to, a person's abilities, that, DJA, works with. So maybe talk more about faith in media after you talk about maybe three things you think all newsrooms should either be aware of, or they should accommodate, or they should be able to implement, and maybe how they can best do that, what you might recommend.
Sure. Oh, there's a culture, like a grind culture in newsrooms where everything has to move fast and what is it? Move fast, break things or whatever.
Yeah,
and
yeah, that was Facebook's motto for a while.
right. And I I I think that news is in the middle, like the news industry is in the middle of a huge transition and it doesn't know where it's going, right? They say, "Oh yeah, we know where we're going." No, you don't. You have no idea where you're going. Everything has changed. Um, what the abilities of these large newsrooms? It's like you have these giant newsrooms that aren't economically efficient anymore, but they're still sort of working in the same way that they always worked, and it's not working. It's just not working. So my idea is like while you're figuring this new world, how do you figure out how to make it more inclusive for everyone, right? First of all, grind culture is not healthy for anyone. It actually creates disability. I used to see all kinds of people in newsrooms start out non-disabled, and by 10 years in, they became disabled uh, from this grind culture. So
Mhm.
this isn't a healthy, it's not like, oh, this is good for everyone, just not disabled people. This is a systemic bad culture. Like, no one should be working like this. No one, I would always see people who would get into these positions, they would go higher and higher, and then they would gain a ton of weight because they were eating poorly, because they didn't have the time to eat right. So there's none of it is healthy. None of this works. So my main thing is revisit how you employ people, revisit how you take care of people. I don't know that this culture, like it's a culture shift. It's how do and it's all of the things like working from home. A lot of people can work from home in newsrooms. Like there are whole newsrooms that don't have space. Most new ones, they don't have offices. They have PO boxes where they send their IRS stuff. Everything else is done from their home. So why are we still propagating this idea that you have to come in? You know, if you're not working on television or broadcast or breaking news, why can't you work in the middle of the night if that's when your energy levels are higher? If you give someone a deadline, we give people deadlines. Hey, this needs to be out by this time. I don't care when they work on it. I don't. You need to get it, you need to get it to the editor in time so that we can get it out by that date. But if you want to work from 12 to 6 in the morning, who cares? Like, who
Yeah.
cares?
Whenever you're the most productive, right?
Right. If you need to work 3 hours a day on it, 7 days a week rather than 5 days, 8 hours a day, do it. And these are, it's just basic, like, everybody is really concerned with, well, what is productivity like? Our productivity is great for such a small staff. Our productivity is really great, but we make sure um, whatever anyone needs, they can get. Like if they can't, if they're sick and they can't work, tell us you're sick and you can't work, and then that's it. Like we don't have discussions about it. You said you can't do it, so you can't do it. And then someone else, let us know, and then someone else will pick it up for you. Like it's about community care, and I think there needs to be more of that. As far as like bringing my faith into it, I grew up Catholic in a very social justice framework. Um, I was baptized in this room, actually, in the living room. In the punch bowl. My mom, if she were still alive, would be like, "It wasn't in the punch bowl." It totally was. The holy water was in the punch bowl. Um, and everybody was there. Like I grew up with lesbians raising families, um, single moms, and it was about the true teachings for us of like Jesus and like everyone's welcome and everyone has rights. And then so I've had but also in this neighborhood it was Jewish. It was a Jewish neighborhood. So I grew up around Holocaust survivors um, and people who were very active in social justice movements through their Jewish faith. So my faith really comes from those two traditions. Like I think your community raises you. I'm not Jewish, but I feel very close to the Jewish religion and the Jewish tenets because of who was around when I was being raised. Um, so like all of my ideas around faith, it's filtered through a social justice lens.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing. Khaleesi, any questions you have?
Yeah, loved when you were talking about that rich, textured community that sort of supported you and raised you, and how that informed your faith beliefs and also just how you see the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that influence has given you hope and supported you, not just as you were growing up, but throughout your career and through your adult life?
Yeah. So um, I think when you're a disabled kid and you're growing up in spaces, uh, y the people around you inform how you see yourself, right? Um, and I feel like I was always told to walk around with my chest out and keep it moving and let people know if they were crossing lines, and that came from everywhere. Like I was told to sort of live out loud and don't feel shamed by anyone or anything. um Not that you don't feel shame, you should feel shame sometimes when you do bad things, but like not shame around yourself and like who you are and how you came to this world. And so I think that's something that was really important for me and also pushed me through really hard times in newsrooms. I kind of always had this base of, um, well, no, this isn't right. And so you're okay to say that. And it gets you in trouble sometimes when you don't shut up and you keep talking. But I'll just tell this little story. When I was leaving CNN, I was known as kind of annoying, like, and I'll be clear about that. I was a little annoying in the newsroom, because I didn't let things go. Like if they were wrong, they were wrong. And one of my bosses, who I worked with for like 7 years, his goodbye speech was, "Oh, Cara." He goes, She always just says, she always says what's right. And she always tells us what to do. And it's always the right thing. And she pushes us to do the right thing. And yes, it's annoying, but it's always right. And that, and like, that's true. Like, I do. Like, if I feel really strong about something, you're not going to stop me from saying it, because I I do believe in justice, right? I do believe that everybody on this planet has a right to be here and has a right to civil rights. And if we're not, and that to me is the foundation of religion. Like, you everyone is equal. Every person is equal. And we need to make this world a better place so that people can be respected and their rights respected. That's the point. It's their rights.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, Khaleesi, let me do this. I'm going to do the mentorship micro musings. Okay. And then if you want to ask some of the student questions, I'll let you ask probably the majority of those, but we'll get some quick hits in here, Cara. So I'll ask you a quick question in 15 seconds or less. You give me your answer. If it deserves more than that, take what you need. But we try to keep this just moving along. Early bird or night owl?
I know.
Night owl for you. Okay. Okay, breaking news or long form documentary?
Long form.
Okay, I thought you'd like that. Yeah. One word that best describes your working style.
Chaotic.
Chaotic. Okay. All right. How about a project that changed how you see disability in media?
I think it would be the Guardian documentary.
Okay, the Guardian documentary. Wonderful. Right after PBS, you said, right?
It was before.
Before PBS. Okay. Okay. All right. Um, Biggest difference in your mind between being a journalist and being an advocate?
Mm, that's a hard one. So here's my thought on that. So, there's this thing that everyone says, oh, journalists shouldn't be biased. There's no such thing. And people need to stop saying that. Oh, I want my journalism to not be biased. I'm sorry. Every human that walks into a newsroom is biased. So you're going to get however the news filters in through their brain is how it's going to come out. Like, here's something that what needs to happen, and the thought around like this is that if more different kinds of people are in newsrooms, that's how you create no bias. And so, because people are in community and they're having discussions, and so their biases may come out, but then they're having discussions with people who have different ideas. And then you come to a sort of a conversation around and a larger, better picture of what is actually happening.
Yeah, yeah, great answer. Two more, and then we'll transition over to Khaleesi. But one thing you think young journalists misunderstand about disability coverage, or if somebody entering journalism, what is one thing you would want to tell them about disability coverage?
I think young people actually have a better grip on it than the people that are in newsrooms now, quite frankly. I think they've grown up with more understanding around disability. Um, I think what young people should understand is that when they're entering in these newsrooms, the people that are running the newsrooms may not be as enlightened as they are. And so, how do you get your point across to people who don't get it? How do you convince them? I think that's the larger question for younger people is like, how do you convince these people that you're right?
Good, good, good. Okay, the last micro musing that we'll do is this. What is one word you would use to describe your legacy so far?
Um, uh, I don't know. That's hard. One word. I don't think a lot about legacy. I just think maybe I'm opening a door. Maybe I think of it more like that. I think that everyone who's working on this is pushing the door open together. And so maybe I'm helping with that. It's like just shoving it open a little bit further so that more people can walk through the door or more people can shove the door open a little bit further. Like that's how I view it. I'm just a cog working out.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you.
Okay. Our first question is from Ethan. Miss Cara, do you have an opinion about why the public is often uninterested in certain groups in our society? Do you feel like it's getting better or worse?
I think it's getting better. Um, I think it's getting better because uh, there's a lot more news around, and the social media, for good or bad, has democratized things. So people can get a news org started up pretty quickly um, and get their voice out there, for good or bad. Sometimes it's not great. Um, I'm sorry, what was the question again? I apologize.
Do you have an opinion about why the public is often uninterested in certain groups in our society?
I don't know that the public is uninterested, actually. I think that I think that legacy newsrooms in particular are uh, they employ a lot of people with the same point of view, and that they come from the same background, they come from the same schools, so they're all being trained by the same people, which is very limiting, and so their worldview is limited, and so and I actually think that's largely what's wrong with the news right now is that people in these large newsrooms where most people get their news from, whether it's the New York Times, CNN, all of these big, well-funded newsrooms are are staffed by by people that are educated in the same places. Like n- because generally these newsrooms don't want to venture out and hire people that didn't go to Columbia, that didn't go to NYU, like that maybe went to University of Kansas or someone, and this isn't just about disability. I remember being a Midwesterner in New York City during the Ferguson uprisings, and they had no one, they didn't ask me, and they had no one else to cover St. Louis. So they had a woman who grew up in Scarsdale, New York, and another woman who grew up in Portland, Oregon, who were covering the St. Louis uprising around Ferguson from New York City. And neither one of them had ever been to St. Louis. Not just Ferguson. They'd never been to St. Louis. They didn't understand it. they were saying things that made no sense. I ended up getting up from my desk again, butting in, and walking on and being like, everything they're saying is ridiculous. Like, nothing makes sense. You don't know what you're talking about. And you're going to report this, and the people in St. Louis are going to get angry at you because it's false. Everything you're saying is false. So I think a lot of it has to do with just sort of this little club that they've built up, and they don't realize that it's a club. That's the other thing. Like, a lot of them just don't understand that it's a club that they've created. So I think what needs to happen is that we're going to have to start broadening out like where we find our journalists.
Hmm. Do you feel like you see that in a lot of other contexts? People not knowing that they're in a club, but maintaining that club and sort of making it hard for people to break into spaces?
Yes, I mean, that's pretty much what's wrong with our world right now, is that everybody's in these little silos
Mm.
and everybody thinks they get it, but they don't. I just drove from Minneapolis to St. Louis and back, and I try to drive in the Midwest when I can, just because it's been so long since I've lived here and seen what's going on. I've been living in New York on this little remote island, basically. Um, and it's very different what's happening in the Midwest versus what the story that's being told about the Midwest. And I think that more journalists need to come from the places where they're reporting.
Love that. Thank you so much. We've got another question from Isabella. She says, I don't want to be insensitive, but I'm not your typical beautiful person. And I'm wondering if people at these big news outlets mostly worried about how you looked or your ability to use equipment. I really appreciate your openness to speak about this topic.
I'm gonna be real. Yeah, they do care about how you look. And I had when I say I was discriminated against, I was said things were said to me out loud. Like, I once said, "Oh, I had just started like really working in journalism. And I said, I need to figure out how to like move fast and like move up quickly because these are the things I want to get done." And one of the producers said to me, "That's never going to happen for you." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because of the way you look."
Wow.
And I was shocked. I was
Wow.
shocked that it was said out loud. Um, and I said, "Wow, that's super awful what you just said." And the person who said it, because these people live in these silos, she didn't even recognize that what she said was awful and also could be like, I could have gone to HR if I wanted to with it. Um, and when I said something to her, she went, "Oh, no, 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 well, no, I was just talking about the system." And it's like, no, but you're propagating the system up, like by continuing to say these things. So, yes, do I feel like it's still happening inside these newsrooms? Absolutely. Do I think that it's impossible now? No. Um, I think it was impossible when I was there, but um, that was years ago. Like, I left in 2016, and that was probably said to me in around 2008. So things have changed. Things are moving on. I'm not going to paint a rosy picture of what's happening right now, but it's better than it was.
As non disabled people, how do we sort of, how do you say it, like just be quiet and listen when it comes to hearing experiences like this, but then also not propagating or like not maintaining these systems, even if it's the way things are.
Um, I had
Newsrooms.
so the reason why I was able to do the things that I did, like write and work on documentaries, was because there were people that were figuring out how to subvert the system, right? I didn't I didn't do these things on my own. I had conspirators that were like, no, let's figure it out. Let's do it. And so that's what I like. What did John Lewis say? Get into good trouble, like, right? Good trouble. So I had editors who were like, I don't care what they say. You're going to write this thing. And then they would just start, and they wouldn't ask. They would just start funneling work to me. And they were like, we think this one's good for you. You write it. And there was no discussion around it. I didn't have to beg for it. They just started figuring out ways that I could go around the system and do certain things. Um, the photojournalists, which are mostly a group of really irreverent men, um, spent a lot of time. Like how I learned how to do documentaries wasn't through the producers; it was through the photojournalists. Like the first shoot I ever went on, I was completely unprepared to be by myself, but they sent me with a guy named Fred Shang, who's now retired, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I think that was on purpose that they sent me out, like kind of not knowing how to do it, hoping I would fail and stop asking to do it. And Fred was like, I screwed up. Like I totally screwed up during this interview and it was going nowhere. And he grabbed me and was like, come here. And he pulled me to the side, he put his camera down, pulled me to the side, and he goes, 1, 2, 3. Here's what you ask. Here's how you go. Here's what you do. And he goes, don't. And when they come back with this, do this. And I was like, oh, thank you. And then we moved on. But it was like Fred just was like, let's reorient, Kara. Like, let's get it together. And that's how I learned was in unconventional ways. I didn't learn through the producers. I learned through people who were super experienced and had been on thousands of shoots. Like Fred started working at CNN in 1983.
Wow.
This was so
Sorry.
when he was like a kid, like he he was like 19 when he started in 1983, and so he had all this wealth of knowledge of how to like do things, and so that's how I learned is through just unconventional ways.
That is so cool. Thank you. Oh, we've got a question from Emily. What is your favorite topic to cover or the topic you wish you could write about?
So this is going to be surprising. I took up disability because no one else was doing it, but I really wanted to write about fashion. Like that's actually what I wanted to write about. And I think eventually DJA is going to write like move into the cultural space and write about fashion and accessible stuff and accessible fashion. Uh, but that was kind of what I'm more of a culture person rather than a hard news person, although I'm good at hard news. Like where my heart is close.
Yeah,
I love
that's
that.
great. Well, great. But what didn't we cover that you want to share? Again, remember the audience are, for the majority of us, at least watching this, they're young college students. And they're thinking about, getting into journalism. They're taking that next step and things that you would suggest based on your experience that they should know getting into journalism and or things that you feel passionate about. I want to go back to some of the overlaps between faith and disability, because again, both are maybe on the fringes, like I said before. When you think of those two things, and maybe these are more principle based than anything, but what do you wish, if you had a magic wand and could wave it right now, what do you wish that people in the newsroom would understand about being on the margins, whether it's faith based, disability based, any other marginalization that occurs?
What I wish they would understand is that the people that they're supposed to be reporting on who have these marginalizations are also people that are in the newsroom. And so how you treat people in the newsroom is directly reflected on how you cover people outside. Like these aren't disconnected ideas. I think there's a lot of disconnect that's happening with journalists, where they're like, no, I can cover this. I'm not biased. I get it. And then they go into a newsroom and it's completely biased. They don't treat people the same way. There's no one in power that is from these marginalizations, and then they think that they can cover these groups adequately, and they can't. And because they don't get it, because no one's around them. Um, and so you don't understand intricacies of living on the margins, living um, in, as not a majority like person. Like you don't have the privileges of the majority. And so, what does that, if you don't understand that inside your newsroom, you're not going to understand the systems that are keeping people in these marginalized spaces. And so, how do you, like, they need to start thinking about how to square that circle.
I love that. One thought too. I'm reading between the lines, but what I'm hearing you say is people be more empathetic, have bigger ears than you have mouths,
Yes,
listen to stories, um, yeah, help people on their journey. Right? It all comes back to some of those, I think, principles that underline most faith traditions, which is kindness, love, acceptance, generosity, all of those things, right? And if we see that exhibited in the newsroom, we just become a better, more pluralistic community overall.
absolutely. And the
Okay.
listening thing is so big. Like, I think a lot of journalists like to talk a lot. I know I do. But I shut up most of the time when I'm interviewing someone. I just let people talk. And, sometimes my producers and directors are like, they're talking too long. I'm like, no, 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 just let them talk. Like, let them talk because we might get somewhere where you didn't expect to get. And I've always found that when I worked on the Brad Lomax documentary, one subject, I let her talk for 2 hours. I did, and I learned so much. Learned because some of it when I was doing the Brad Lomax, Brad died. A lot of people don't know the story, but he died in the 80s. Story was never told, nothing was written down. And so here was a woman who didn't know him, but she was in all of the spaces where he was. So I just sort of let her, I kept her talking because I think a lot of us didn't really understand like how the 504 sit-in was orchestrated. Like we understand the story, but we don't understand. No, we were all in separate rooms in an office. So that's why I didn't know who Brad was. And this is how we organized. We organized at night. We all showed up, so a representative for each room would go to the larger meeting and come back and bring like the minutia of like how the communications happened and like we'll never know that if we don't shut up and let these people talk and like how people organized back then directly reflects on how we organize and if we don't know how they did it then how will we do it too. So I think listening is so huge. What you think you probably don't know, so just be quiet. Be quiet.
That's great. Great advice. Great advice. Thank you.
Do we have time for one more student question? All right. Hine asks, what is one of your favorite things about training new journalists, and what advice would you give to a young woman of color trying to get into the journalism industry?
So I'm always interested in like where because I'm Gen X, and so the people that are coming up now are what Gen Z, and I feel like there's a disconnect. Like your lives are different, and so again, I spent a lot of time listening because the hacks or the things that I did to get where I am may not work. So I have to listen. I think the biggest the biggest thing that I love about it is being able to hear like how people grew up and what challenges that they're experiencing and like how we can work together to create a place in newsrooms that are comfortable and accessible for you. Like my growing up and the way I function, the way I work as a Gen Xer is a very different world by the way you grew up and with all of like your lives have been recorded your entire existence. We didn't have that. Like we could go off and do horrible things and no one would know about it. And like still don't know about it. Like my parents don't know anything about half of what I did because there's no record of it. But living a life on camera is very different. And so I think um and I think that we as adults need to start listening more. And I think Gen Z needs to be able to hear it, um, but also listen to us. Like I think there needs to be sort of this really good direct communication between the two groups, and we both need to show up and listen, like both sides, because Gen X also has a lot of like uh, wisdom to impart that may seem outdated, but we have a lot of hacks that can get you through things.
It's good. That's good. As a fellow Gen Xer, I agree. More so, I agree with the fact we should shut up and listen, and take our advice when it's good advice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Kara, thank you so much for joining us on Mentorship Mike. This speaker series is meant to inspire the rising generation of journalists and those going into entertainment. What did we miss out on? Where are the gaps? What do you want to tell this rising generation of journalists specifically about? Yeah, what wisdom do you want to impart to them?
Um, I want to think about that. Uh, you know, this world is pretty messed up right now. Like it's but it I think a lot of times when the world gets to a place where we are right now, where there's a lot of confusion, I think out of confusion comes innovation. And don't despair. I think there's a lot of despair around, like it's never going to change. No, I think when it gets really bad, the way it is right now, that means that we're on the precipice of a huge change. And the change can go either way, though. And so we all have to kind of lock in right now and try and push it for good. Um, and that means everyone has to get involved. And I think there's a lot of segregation of generations and blame, like these weird generation wars that are happening right now, um, are not useful. Um, they're just not. And like I get the impulse from younger generations to be like, what did you leave us with? I mean, because it's a mess. Like it's an absolute um, but there's not really any time for that. Like we can do an autopsy later so that we make sure that we don't do that again. But right now we all have to kind of band together and like fix it and know and we have to fix it so that the younger people because the younger people are going we're going to die and the younger people this is the world that they're going to live in. And so we have to be able to listen to the younger people. And I think as a Gen Xer, I really resonate with that because nobody listened to us. They're still not listening to us because we're a smaller generation and we're sandwiched between boomers and millennials. And so no one really listened to us and still aren't. Like we've never had a Gen X president. I'm not sure we will. Like I think we might skip directly to millennial. But that doesn't mean that Gen X doesn't offer some really great advice and information. And I also think that the younger generations offer really great information and feedback for the world they grew up in. and are growing up in, and maybe the choices that we make that don't work.
Awesome. Cara, thank you so much. So good to have you on today. Khaleesi, thank you. Great job doing the co-hosting. And we'll see you on our next episode of Mentorship Mike Speaker Series. Thank you.
Thank you.